In the early gray light of dawn, somewhere along the front lines of eastern Ukraine, the air was heavy with silence. The fog hung thick over the water, wrapping the landscape in an eerie calm that seemed to whisper warnings of what was coming. For days, Russian forces had been preparing for a major river crossing. They believed they had finally found a weakness: a narrow stretch of the Seversky Donets River, one of the most critical natural barriers separating Ukrainian defensive lines from the territory still under Moscow's control. The Russians thought this crossing would give them the advantage they needed. But what they didn't know was that the Ukrainians were not just watching, they were waiting, patiently, silently, deadly. The Ukrainian military had learned from every encounter, every failed Russian assault, every miscalculation their enemy made. Over time, they developed a keen sense for Russian tactics. They knew the signs, the drone scouting patterns, the armored columns that began to reposition near the river, the sudden spikes in radio chatter that hinted at an upcoming move. From the moment the first Russian engineering vehicles appeared near the banks, Ukrainian intelligence had already begun tracking them through satellite images and drone feeds. The plan was simple. Let them come. Let them believe the crossing would be easy. And then, when they were deep enough in, cut the bridge and the army in half. This was not a battle that depended only on firepower. It depended on timing, discipline, and psychological warfare. The Ukrainians were fighting smart, not just hard. They had turned patience into a weapon. Behind the front lines, Ukrainian drone operators sat in makeshift bunkers, staring at their screens, observing the movements of every tank and every troop unit on the opposite side. The Russians were building a pontoon bridge, piece by piece, trying to connect one side of the river to the other. It was an old Soviet tactic, one that had worked in the past. But this time, the Ukrainians were ready with Western-supplied precision weapons, artillery guidance systems, and real-time reconnaissance. As the bridge took shape, Russian commanders ordered their first vehicles to move across. The massive armored carriers began rolling over the temporary structure, their engines rumbling like thunder in the mist. Behind them, trucks loaded with supplies and troops followed closely, forming a line that stretched along the riverbank. Everything seemed to be going according to their plan. They believed Ukrainian forces had retreated, or at least were too far to react in time. It was a costly mistake. Miles away, Ukrainian artillery crews were already in position. Coordinates had been transmitted, target locks confirmed, and drone operators were feeding live updates directly to the fire control teams. The order was clear: wait until the bridge is full. Wait until the majority of the enemy forces have crossed or are in the middle of the structure. Then strike with everything you have. Minutes passed. The Russians continued to advance. More and more vehicles piled onto the narrow bridge, their heavy weight pressing against the floating pontoons. Ukrainian soldiers waited in complete silence, their fingers resting near the triggers of their artillery guns. Inside the drone feed room, one officer whispered, "Not yet. Let them come closer." The tension was unbearable. Every heartbeat felt like a drum. And then the signal came. The sky erupted. A massive explosion shattered the dawn silence as Ukrainian artillery unleashed a storm of fire on the crossing point. Precision-guided shells rained down on the pontoon bridge, tearing through metal and vehicles with ruthless accuracy. The first few hits struck the middle of the bridge, instantly engulfing it in flames. The impact was so powerful that several Russian tanks were thrown sideways into the river. Within seconds, chaos consumed the entire crossing. Once ordered line of armored vehicles became a burning trap. Russian soldiers tried desperately to escape. Some jumped into the cold water, attempting to swim to shore, but the current was strong and debris from the destroyed bridge rained down all around them. Others scrambled to reverse their vehicles, but it was too late. The Ukrainian artillery kept pounding, targeting not just the bridge but also the staging area on the far bank. Drones captured the entire scene. Explosions lighting up the fog, ammunition trucks detonating in black smoke, billowing into the sky like dark pillars of defeat. Within 15 minutes, the entire Russian operation collapsed. Dozens of vehicles were destroyed, hundreds of troops were cut off, trapped on the wrong side of the river with no way back and no bridge left standing. Ukrainian drones hovered above, continuing to mark coordinates for artillery adjustments. Every time a new target appeared, another explosion followed. It was brutal, precise, and devastating. This was not just a tactical victory, It was a psychological one. Ukraine had not only stopped the Russian advance, but had turned the enemy's strength against them. The patience and intelligence that went into the trap demonstrated how far Ukrainian defense strategy had evolved since the early days of the war. Back then, Russia had often relied on overwhelming force, believing that sheer numbers and firepower could crush resistance. But now every move was being countered by superior strategy, advanced Western technology, and the fierce determination of Ukrainian soldiers defending their homeland. As the smoke cleared, what remained of the bridge sank slowly into the river. The scene was haunting: twisted metal, burnt vehicles, and the silence that followed destruction. Ukrainian soldiers on the far side of the river watched through binoculars. Some smiled grimly. Others simply nodded, knowing their plan had worked perfectly. They didn't cheer. There was no joy in destruction. But there was satisfaction. The satisfaction of survival, of protecting their territory, of proving once again that they could outsmart and outfight a stronger invader. In the aftermath, Russian state media tried to downplay the loss, claiming it was a temporary setback. But satellite images and drone footage told the real story. The destruction of the crossing became viral across social media, a symbol of Ukrainian resilience and a warning to any future invaders who thought they could cross Ukrainian rivers unchallenged. Military analysts around the world studied the footage, praising Ukraine's tactical discipline and precision execution. It was a textbook example of how modern warfare had evolved, where information, patience, and timing could outweigh even the largest tanks and artillery batteries. In Kyiv, military officials confirmed the operation's success, stating that the attack had eliminated a significant portion of enemy equipment attempting to cross the river. They didn't reveal exact numbers, but Western intelligence later estimated that more than 80 vehicles were destroyed, and over 400 Russian troops were either killed, wounded, or captured. It was one of the most devastating ambushes of the war to that point. The victory also carried strategic importance. By destroying the bridge, Ukraine prevented Russia from establishing a new foothold on the western side of the river, effectively halting their advance in that region for weeks. It bought Ukraine valuable time to reinforce defensive lines and reposition units for upcoming counteroffensives. And beyond the battlefield, it sent a powerful message that Ukraine's defense wasn't about luck. It was about skill, coordination, and intelligence. Every successful operation like this added another layer of pressure on Russian command. Inside Moscow, frustration grew as generals struggled to explain repeated failures on the front. They blamed logistics, communication, and even weather. But the truth was simpler. Ukraine had adapted. The defenders were now the hunters. Each time Russia tried to push forward, Ukraine responded with precise strikes that shattered morale and destroyed equipment worth millions. As night fell again over the same riverbank where the battle had taken place, Ukrainian troops walked among the debris. The air was still thick with smoke, and the water reflected the glow of burning wreckage. They gathered what intelligence they could, retrieved enemy maps, and identified potential plans for future crossings. But even as they worked, they remained alert. Because in war, victory never lasts long. The next battle always waits just beyond the horizon. For the people of Ukraine, news of the destroyed bridge spread like wildfire. It became a symbol of hope. On social media, images of the burning river crossing were shared thousands of times, accompanied by messages of pride and defiance. They thought they could cross our land, one post read, but Ukraine stands unbroken. It wasn't just about military success. It was about morale, about showing the world that, even after years of war, Ukraine still refused to bow. Western analysts later called it one of the most tactically brilliant ambushes of the conflict. Not just for its destruction, but for its timing. The patience required to let the enemy commit fully before striking took extraordinary discipline. And that discipline, they said, was now the hallmark of the Ukrainian army. It wasn't about luck or desperation. It was about intelligence, training, and a relentless drive to defend every inch of their homeland. Even months after the incident, the destroyed bridge remained visible in satellite images, a silent reminder of what had happened that morning. The river flowed calmly again, as if washing away the traces of war. but beneath the surface lay the twisted remains of metal and machinery. A graveyard of failed ambition. The Russians would try again, elsewhere of course. They always did. But Ukraine had proven something vital, that they could not only resist, but turn the tide through sheer strategy and courage. And so, the story of that morning became part of Ukrainian military legend. It was whispered in the trenches, retold in training camps, and remembered by those who had survived it. The message was clear. Patience wins wars and timing can destroy armies. In the end, it wasn't just a bridge that collapsed. It was the illusion of Russian invincibility. Ukraine had waited for the right moment. And when that moment came, they blew the bridge apart. And the world watched in awe.